The last time I saw my mother, she was a stranger. Her eyes, once so bright and full of life, were now dull and sunken. Her skin, usually warm and soft, was cold and yellow. I remember the smell of the hospital, the sterile air that seemed to suck the last bit of hope from the room. It was August 14th, 1958, and I didn't know it would be the last time I'd see her alive. Dad and I spent most of the day at Methodist Hospital. We knew it was the end, but we didn't want to admit it. We were back in our little world, the three of us, just like old times. We talked about the good days, the laughter, the music. Mom would smile, but it never quite reached her eyes. She was slipping away, and we were powerless to stop it. Elvis, my son, spent the whole day with us. He left just before midnight, but Dad stayed. He held Mom's hand through the night, just like he always did. At 3:15 a.m., Dad woke to the sound of Mom's labored breathing. She was struggling, gasping for air. Within minutes, she was gone. My heart shattered into a million pieces. How could this be happening? How could my strong, loving mother just disappear? Dr. Clark, the doctor who had been treating Mom, was always confused by her case. He couldn't figure out why her liver was so damaged when she had never touched alcohol. Even now, years later, his daughter Nancy remembers him saying, "I never understood what was wrong with her liver." But back then, they didn't know about the silent killer that had been lurking inside Mom for years. Mom's liver was a mystery, a puzzle that no one could solve. It was resilient, just like her, but it had been under attack for a long time. The symptoms came and went, making it hard for anyone to pin down what was wrong. She was always tired, her skin was yellow, and her belly was swollen, but everyone thought it was just overeating. No one knew that her liver was failing, that her brain was being poisoned by toxins that a healthy liver would have filtered out. Mom's condition was a mix of heart and liver failure, but the real culprit was something no one understood at the time. It was a genetic disease, passed down from her mother, Doll, and her father, Bob. They were first cousins, which made the odds of inheriting the disease much higher. The disease is called Alpha-1 antitrypsin in Deficiency, and it's a killer that no one knew about back then. Mom's liver was filled with a protein that couldn't leave her body. It built up, causing scarring and damage that eventually led to cirrhosis. Her lungs were also affected, making it hard for her to breathe. She was always short of breath, always tired, but no one connected the dots. They didn't know that the same disease that affected her liver was also causing problems in her lungs. Looking back, I can see the signs. The weight gain, the swelling in her legs, the jaundice. But back then, we just thought she was getting older. We didn't know that her brain was being poisoned, that she was becoming someone else. She was confused, depressed, and angry. The person I knew was slipping away, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. The night she died, I felt like a part of me died too. I was only a teenager, but I knew that life would never be the same. The world was a little darker, a little colder. And the pain of losing her stayed with me, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. But that night, as I held her hand and whispered my goodbyes, I promised myself that I would never forget her. I would keep her memory alive, just like she kept our family together. She was more than just a mother. She was the heart of our family. And even though she was gone, her love would always be with us. Elvis always said I was his favorite person in the world, and I believed him. We were close, like best friends. But when I lost my mom, I realized how much I needed her. Losing her was like losing a piece of myself. I was only 23, but I felt so much older. When the news came that my mom, Gladys, had passed, I was at Fort Hood, getting ready for the army. I rushed home to Memphis, and everything changed. The house felt empty, even though it was packed with people trying to comfort me. I remember touching my mom's hands and forehead in the casket, wishing she could come back. I told her how much I loved her and how much I needed her. I couldn't let go. Sam Phillips, the guy who helped me get started, came over to talk to me. He was firm but kind. He told me I had to let her go, that holding on wouldn't bring her back. It was hard, but he was right. The Blackwood Brothers, my mom's favorite gospel group, came to sing at the funeral. I broke down a lot, but they sang about hope and heaven, which gave me some comfort. After the funeral, I sat on the front porch with Dixie Locke, my first girlfriend. We cried and talked for hours. She understood me in a way that nobody else did. I told her how I felt like a fly in a spider's web, stuck in the music business and fame. I wanted to quit, but I couldn't because so many people depended on me. I had to keep going. A few days later, I had to go back to Fort Hood. I told them not to touch anything in my mom's room while I was away. It was like I was trying to keep her memory alive. Things at Fort Hood were different after that. I wasn't as happy and carefree as before. I was more serious, and the weight of losing my mom was always with me. Then I got the news that I was being sent to Germany. The thought of leaving the country for 2 years felt even harder because I was still grieving. I spent my last night in Texas with Eddie Faddle, a close friend. We talked about music and my fears about my career. I was worried that people would forget about me. Eddie tried to reassure me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. When I got to New York, the reporters asked me about rock and roll and my mom. I tried to stay positive, but talking about my mom was hard. I shared a poem a fellow soldier gave me, "Should You Go First." It talked about remembering the good times and finding hope in the memories. I underlined parts of the poem and wrote notes, trying to find a way to cope with my grief. On the ship to Germany, Charlie Hodge, my bunkmate, told me jokes to make me laugh. He helped me through those first few days, and we became lifelong friends. I remember lying in my bunk, thinking about my mom and how much I missed her. But Charlie's jokes and the poem gave me some comfort. In Germany, I kept thinking about my mom and how much I wanted to see her again. I wrote in the margins of the poem, asking God why he took her away and how much I needed her. I hoped that one day I would be able to follow her and see her again. For now, I had to keep moving forward, even when it felt like the world was against me. Elvis was feeling homesick right away when he joined the army, but he found a way to make his new home feel like, well, home. Just a few days after he left, my Grandpa Vernon, Grandma Dodger, and some of Elvis' friends, Lamar Fike and Red West, flew from New York to Frankfurt, Germany. At first, they stayed in hotels, but then they found a house to rent. Even in the army, Elvis wanted his family close. He had moved them to Texas before, and now he was moving them across the ocean to Germany. Elvis' girlfriend, Anita Wood, was eager to join him in Germany. She had her passport and everything. But Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis' manager, said no way. The colonel was worried that if the press found out, they'd think Elvis and Anita were married, and that could ruin Elvis' career. So Elvis followed the colonel's advice, even though he was scared there might not be a career to come back to. He wrote Anita letters and talked to her on the phone a lot. He promised her they'd get married and have a baby when he got back to the States. In Germany, Elvis lived off the base like he could afford to. My Grandma Dodger, who everyone called Dodger, made the house feel like home. She cooked all of Elvis' favorite foods, just like my Grandma Gladys used to. One of Elvis' friends, Rex Mansfield, said Elvis loved simple food like burned bacon, hard fried eggs, and peanut butter and banana sandwiches. He didn't like fancy food, and could eat the same things every day. Elvis was still dealing with the loss of my Grandma Gladys. He saw an army doctor for it, and they said he had fatigue syndrome because he was still sad about her passing. The doctor gave him medicine to help him feel better. Elvis had some fun trips to Munich and Paris while in Germany. He learned things about himself that he never would have learned back home. But most of the time, life in the small rental house was a lot like being at Graceland. Elvis would wake up early, go to work, come home for lunch and then dinner. He'd sign autographs and talk to fans in the evening, and then hang out with his family and friends. Elvis had a tight group of friends with him in Germany, like Rex Mansfield, Lamar Fike, and my Grandpa Vernon. He also made new friends, Joe Esposito and Charlie Hodge, who would stay close for many years. Charlie and Elvis would sing together in the living room, and it helped Elvis' singing get even stronger. But not everything was easy. Elvis was upset with my Grandpa Vernon because he started dating younger women right after my Grandma Gladys died. Elvis thought it was too soon. Things got even worse when Vernon had an affair with a married woman in Germany. Her name was Dee Stanley, and she was married to a sergeant. Dee ended up divorcing her husband and moving back to the States with Vernon. They got married, and Elvis got 3 stepbrothers. Elvis tried to be like the other soldiers and not get special treatment. He did all the same jobs, like KP duty and cleaning the barracks. But the army knew they'd be in big trouble if anything happened to Elvis. One time, Elvis almost got sick from carbon monoxide poisoning while driving a Jeep, but they said it was tonsillitis to keep it a secret. In Germany, Elvis started taking more dexedrine, a kind of medicine that keeps you awake. He got it from the base pharmacy and would share it with his friends. They thought it was safe, but it wasn't good for them. Elvis also had trouble sleeping and would take sleeping pills. He told Priscilla, a young girl he met in Germany, about it. Priscilla was only 14, but they spent a lot of time together. She listened to Elvis when he talked about missing his mom, his worries about his dad dating, and his fears about his career. Elvis and Priscilla's relationship was a bit unusual, but it wasn't uncommon in the South where Elvis came from. He told Priscilla about his health problems, and even gave her some dexedrine to help her stay awake when she was with him late at night. Priscilla's dad, Captain Beaulieu, trusted Elvis and let them see each other. Elvis had to deal with tonsillitis a lot during his time in Germany. He even had to go to the hospital a couple of times. During one stay, they found out he was allergic to codeine, which made him itchy. But he kept taking it later in life, even on the night he died. Elvis was promoted to sergeant near the end of his service. He threw a party to celebrate. By the time he was ready to leave the army, he had changed a lot. He had experienced real loss, lived in a foreign country, and learned more about his music. He was no longer just a kid trying to take care of his parents. He was a man, and he was ready to come back to the States and make a big comeback. Elvis stepped off the plane in March 1960, feeling a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The 2 years he spent in the army had changed him, and he wasn't sure how his fans would react. But as he walked through the crowd, he saw the excitement in their eyes. People were proud to welcome him home. The female fans were still as loyal as ever, but now he had gained the respect of young men and older Americans too. It was like he had earned a whole new group of fans just by serving his country. A reporter asked me how I got that thing Clark Gable had going for him, where all the women loved him and all the guys liked him. I replied, I would say the army had a lot to do with it. Even Frank Sinatra, who once called my music deplorable, was planning a nationwide welcome home show for me on his weekly variety show. Things were definitely changing. At a press conference at Graceland, I talked about my time in the army and what I planned to do next. I missed everything about Memphis and was happy to be back at Graceland. I mentioned a girl I had met in Germany, but I made it clear it wasn't a big romance. Funny enough, 3 years later, Priscilla moved in with me at Graceland. I talked about my plans, which included recording new songs, appearing on Frank Sinatra's show, and making a few movies. I was excited but also a bit nervous. I was 25 now, and I felt different. My friends noticed it too. They said I was more sophisticated and seemed more grounded. Maybe it was just growing up, or maybe it was the loss of my mom and the time I spent away from the spotlight. I realized that all the experiences, good and bad, had shaped me. I was 19 when I started, I said. You get a little older, you learn a little more, and you see things differently. My look and sound had changed too. The long, thin sideburns were gone, and I wanted to try a different style of music. I had always loved singing ballads, and now I wanted to show off my range and control. All of a sudden, he wanted to be a crooner, my friend Marty Lacker said. Songs like It's Now or Never and Are You Lonesome Tonight became big hits, and they showed a different side of me. The day after I got back, I went to visit my mom's grave. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect. I had her grave marked with a beautiful stone and surrounded by angelic statues. I had flowers delivered to her gravesite every week until the day I died. I still had a lot of living to do, but I missed her every day. There are a lot of things that happened since she passed away that I wish she could have been around to see, I said. It would have made her very happy and very proud, but that's life, I can't help it. I tried to pick up where I left off with Anita Wood, but our relationship was already strained. She was jealous and always questioning me about the other girls I was seeing. It was hard to keep things together, and eventually, our relationship ended in 1962. Around the same time, Priscilla started visiting Memphis more often. She even moved in with me at Graceland in 1963. The guys around me, the Memphis Mafia, became a more solid part of my life. They were my friends and my family. I picked them because they had personality and loyalty. We called ourselves the Memphis Mafia, and it was a name we all liked. They helped me with everything, from keeping me company to taking care of the cars. We traveled together in a motorhome, and later a customized Greyhound bus. I did a lot of the driving, and it was one of the few times I felt really free. I wasn't happy with the move, as I was making after the army. They were campy and full of songs that I didn't like. I complained to the colonel, but he said he would try to get better scripts. Some critics noticed that I was more mature on screen, but I still felt like an idiot breaking into song at random moments. The movies made a lot of money, though, and that's what mattered to the colonel. I was a provider, and I wanted to take care of my family and the people around me. In 1961, I did a benefit concert in Hawaii to raise money for the USS Arizona Memorial. It was my first live performance in 3 years, and I was nervous. But the fans were amazing, and we raised over $64,000. I visited the memorial again after it was completed, and it was a powerful experience. "Those guys are still down there," I said, thinking about the sacrifices they made. By the mid-1960s, the movies and music weren't as good as they used to be. I was still the top box office draw, but I knew I could do better. I had to laugh at some of the songs I was given, because if I didn't, I would have cried. I hoped for better roles and more artistic projects, but the money kept coming in, and the colonel kept pushing for more of the same. I was caught between my artistic ambitions and my responsibility to provide for those around me. But I never stopped hoping for something more. Elvis and I were close. I saw him change over the years, and not always for the better. When he first started making movies, the songs were great. Return to Sender, Bossa Nova Baby, and Can't Help Falling in Love were hits that everyone loved, but then things started to slide. Songs like Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce, Ito Eats, and Queenie Wahine's Papaya were, well, let's just say they weren't the best. Elvis seemed to lose interest in the studio. Sometimes he wouldn't even show up. But there was one project he was really passionate about, his first full album of gospel music, His Hand in Mine. He released it in November 1960, and it went to number 3 on the charts. It was his way of honoring his mother and his deep love for gospel music. The movies were a double-edged sword. They earned Elvis a lot of money, but they also kept him from becoming a great actor or a consistent recording artist. Elvis could have been more than just a movie star. Director Hal Cantor said Elvis could have been a great dramatic actor or a good light comedian, but the movies boxed him in. Even though the scripts were often bad, Elvis always gave his best. He said, "The only thing worse than watching a bad movie is being in one." Between films, Elvis would always go back to Memphis. It was his home, where he could relax and be himself. He'd rent out the fairgrounds or a movie theater and stay up all night with his friends, the Memphis Mafia. We were like a tight-knit family. We knew each other's names, hobbies, and what was going on with our families. Elvis never acted like a superstar. He was just a simple, working man at heart, but Hollywood was different. Elvis didn't trust people there. He felt like everyone was fake, just pretending to be his friend. He didn't like the idea of being new money, and felt out of place. He'd say, "Man, everyone acted like they were my best friend. They really laid it on me, but that's Tinseltown stuff." He preferred the simple life back in Memphis, where people were genuine. Elvis had a different side when it came to his leading ladies. He was always comfortable with them, more so than with the Hollywood types. Priscilla was often left behind at Graceland, while Elvis was shooting in California. He didn't want her to have a career. He wanted a traditional wife. But when he met Anne Margaret during the filming of Viva Las Vegas, things changed. They fell in love quickly. Anne Margaret was special to him. They shared a lot of interests, like motorcycles and music. They even watched the news together when they heard about President Kennedy's assassination. It was a moment that brought them closer, but the relationship didn't last. Elvis was committed to Priscilla, and Anne Margaret wanted to keep her career, They remained friends though. Elvis had his struggles too. After his military service, he started using prescription drugs to manage his insomnia and other issues. He'd take uppers to stay awake on set and sleeping pills to get some rest. He was always in control, or so it seemed. He knew a lot about medicine and kept a physician's desk reference PDR on his nightstand. He even thought about becoming a doctor once. But the drugs were a problem, even if we didn't see it at the time. We all took them, thinking they were just medicine. Elvis had health issues early on, but he never complained. I remember one fall evening in 1964, when I went to Graceland. Elvis and his dad Vernon were coming down the stairs, but Elvis needed help. He looked exhausted and was using an oxygen mask. It was a shock to see him like that. He said it was the California smog, but I knew something was wrong. Dr. Charles Clark, who had been the family doctor since Gladys' time, came to check on him. Elvis had trouble breathing and chest pain. His blood pressure was high, and Dr. Clark left him with an oxygen tank. Elvis was always tough, but that night I saw a side of him that was fragile. He was just 29, but he was already dealing with health issues. It was a sign that things were not as perfect as they seemed. Elvis tried to hide it, but the strain of being a superstar was taking its toll. The night Jerry Schilling was at Graceland, Elvis had a health scare. It was the same night Elvis asked Jerry to work for him. Just a few months before, Elvis had hired Larry Geller, a new guy from California. Larry filled in for Elvis' hairdresser, and they hit it off right away. Elvis was always searching for answers, especially about why God chose him to be Elvis Presley. Larry, being Jewish and well-versed in different religions and philosophies, seemed like the person who could help Elvis find those answers. Elvis and Larry would have deep conversations while Larry styled his hair. They both loved reading, and Larry often gave Elvis books on metaphysics, numerology, and religion. My friends and I noticed the change in Elvis' reading material. He went from reading history and joke books to diving into spiritual and philosophical texts. Some of us were uneasy with Larry's California ways and New Age beliefs. We were a group of Southern guys, and Larry was different. Colonel was worried too, because Elvis seemed distracted by his new spiritual interests. The Colonel pulled Elvis aside and told him to get off his religious kick. Elvis was angry and told us, "My life is not a kick, it's real." Elvis continued his spiritual studies, finding fulfillment in them. Around this time, Elvis was making a lot of movies, but they weren't very good. The Colonel was more concerned with making money than creating quality films. Elvis was unhappy with the scripts and the way he was being used by the studios. He felt trapped and often became physically ill thinking about the movies. Even producer Hal Wallis admitted that he made Elvis movies to fund his other artistic projects, which hurt Elvis deeply. Despite the declining quality of his films, Elvis' salary kept increasing. He made his first $1 million film with Harum Scarum. The money allowed Elvis to provide for his family and friends, but as an artist, he felt unfulfilled. He said, "They couldn't have paid me no amount of money in the world to make me feel any self-satisfaction inside." Elvis chose to be a provider first and an artist second, which is why he stayed with the Colonel and kept making those movies. Elvis' family and friends always asked him for money. His grandma lived at Graceland, and his aunt moved in after her husband died. Elvis also provided for all of us in our families. He would lend us money, and rarely, if ever, got paid back. Elvis was determined to keep himself and those around him away from the poverty he grew up in. His dad, Vernon, was always afraid of losing everything and going back to being poor. Elvis, however, believed he could always make more money. Elvis had to keep making more, because he never received good financial advice. Vernon managed the money, but he didn't have the knowledge to handle millions. We were all very private about our finances and health. Sadly, Elvis would run out of both, trying to keep these struggles a secret. Elvis also signed new contracts with the Colonel, who kept getting a bigger share of the profits. The Colonel viewed it as a partnership, but it was one-sided. Elvis did all the work, and the Colonel took a lot of the money. The Colonel also advised Elvis not to take tax deductions, which meant Elvis paid a lot in taxes. To fill his creative void, Elvis started new hobbies. He bought Priscilla a horse because she loved riding, and then he bought horses for everyone, including Vernon and us guys. He realized he needed a bigger place for all the horses, so he bought Circle G, a 160-acre ranch in Mississippi with a big white cross in the middle. Elvis thought the cross was a sign from God. The ranch became a place where Elvis found temporary happiness. He bought pickup trucks for everyone and trailers so we could stay there. For the first time in a long time, Elvis was having fun. He would check on the horses, go to Sears to buy equipment, and do physical labor. It made him feel normal. Elvis loved taking on challenging projects, spending money, and having the people he loved around him. The ranch gave him all of that. Elvis told Larry that the ranch represented how he wanted to live his life. It was for his health and peace of mind. Ray Walker of the Jordanaires said, "The happiest we ever saw Elvis was when he first bought that ranch. If Elvis had managed his money better, the ranch could have been a great escape." But it wasn't long before fans started showing up at Circle G, just like they did at Graceland. Elvis built a 10-foot wall for privacy, but fans would still climb on top of cars and houses to see him. Despite this, the ranch remained a place of solace for Elvis. When it was time to go back to Hollywood to film Clambake, Elvis didn't want to leave. He delayed leaving as long as possible, even getting saddle sores as an excuse. While in California, Elvis fell in the bathroom and hit his head, causing another delay. The Colonel flew in and took control, blaming Larry Geller and the books for Elvis' mood swings. The Colonel demanded that Larry be kept away, and that Elvis stop reading and talking about religion. Elvis was caught between his artistic desires and his responsibilities as a provider. The ranch was his last chance to hold onto the kid from Tupelo, but even that was taken away. Despite everything, Elvis found moments of happiness and normalcy at Circle G, a place where he could just be Elvis. Elvis and I got married in May 1967, and I was terrified about how it would affect his career. The Colonel always told Elvis his fans didn't want to see him married. But deep down, Elvis just wanted a normal life, like most guys his age. He wanted a family. I remember him asking over and over, "What do you think the fans will think?" He was so unsure, even though he was the biggest star in the world. After we got married, I found out I was pregnant. Lisa Marie was a honeymoon baby, born on February 1st, 1968. Elvis was over the moon. He held her for the first time, and his eyes were filled with tears. He was so proud and grateful, but he also felt a sense of guilt. He thought about how unfair it was that Lisa Marie would have everything, while a child born in a poor neighborhood would have nothing. It was a side of Elvis that not many people saw. Becoming a dad changed Elvis. He was more determined than ever to get back to what he loved most, performing live. In 1968, he did a TV special that would become known as the '68 Comeback Special. It was a turning point. The Colonel wanted it to be a Christmas show, but Elvis and the producer, Steve Binder, had other plans. They wanted to show the world the real Elvis, the one who hadn't been seen in years. The special was intense, and even I was blown away. I had never seen him perform live before, and it was a powerful moment. The special was a huge success, and it led to a deal for Elvis to perform in Las Vegas. He was back on stage, and it felt like he had found his way home, but the road ahead was tough. The intense touring and performing took a toll on his health. He started relying more on prescription medication to keep up with the demanding schedule. During this time, the country was changing too. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, and it hit Elvis hard. He was deeply affected by the civil rights movement and the violence that came with it. When he performed "If I Can Dream" at the end of the '68 Comeback Special, it was more than just a song. It was a statement, a plea for hope and unity. Elvis was always torn between who he wanted to be and who the world expected him to be. He struggled with the pressure, but he never lost his passion for music. He was determined to make a difference, both on stage and off. And even though the years ahead would be challenging, he never stopped fighting for what he believed in. Marty Lacker and I had been friends for a long time. We were more than just friends, we were like brothers. When I turned 34 in January 1969, things were tough. I had a sore throat, and I was supposed to record in Nashville soon. Marty and George Klein were telling me to record locally, at American studios. Marty was really honest with me, and he didn't hold back. He told me I needed to change the way I was doing things, or I'd stay in this rut. I didn't like the idea at first, but Marty was right. I agreed to meet with Chip's mom, and thank goodness I did. Songs like In the Ghetto and Suspicious Minds came out of that session, and they were amazing. The reason I had been stuck in a rut was partly because of a deal the Colonel made back in 1955. He said I had to split the publishing rights with Hill and Range. This meant I didn't have access to the best songs. Writers didn't want to give up their rights, so I missed out on a lot of great music. But sometimes I stood up to the Colonel and insisted on recording certain songs. Suspicious Minds was one of them. I had to fight for it, but it became one of my biggest hits. Recording at American sound studios was intense. I was uncomfortable at first, but once I got into it, I felt like I was back on top. I told Marty how great it felt, but then I got sick again. I had tonsillitis and a high fever, but we still managed to finish the session. I was determined to have one more #1 hit, and Suspicious Minds did just that. After those sessions, I never recorded at American Sound again. I don't know why, but it was a special time. I worked really hard, and so did everyone else. But my body was starting to show signs of trouble. I had sore throats, fevers, and ear infections a lot. I first told Dr. Nick about my insomnia when he treated me for saddle sores. He found out I had high blood pressure and vertigo. It was clear my immune system was compromised. Dr. Nick became my main doctor, and he even toured with me. He was strict about how people treated him, and I respected that. I met a nurse named Tish Henley Kirk, and she became a big part of my life. She was tough and honest, and I liked that. She helped me a lot, and we became close. Looking back, it's clear that I had an immune system disorder. It's called hypogammaglobulinemia, which means my body didn't make enough antibodies to fight off infections. I had this problem my whole life, and it got worse as I got older. I had a lot of infections, and it made it hard to stay healthy. I also had a genetic disorder called Alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, which affected my lungs. All of this made it even harder for me to stay well. I relied on medication to keep up with my demanding schedule, and that led to addiction. It was a tough battle, but I tried my best to keep going. I wish I could have known back then what I know now. Maybe things would have been different. But I'm grateful for the music, the people who supported me, and the fans who loved me. Despite everything, I lived a life that was full of music and magic.